Thackery Binx. Neither his father, his mother, nor anyone else ever knew what became of him those 300 years ago. And so...
So wait, how do you know? What's up, guys? It's Casey Zuckelman, aka the Fourth Sanderson Sister, coming at you with another Hocus Pocus theory video. In today's video, I'm going to do my best to explain the plot hole that no one has probably ever caught before. How does Mrs. Olin's story work if no one knew what happened to Thackery Binx? I mean, think about it. Is she guessing? Is she fantasizing it? Is she making crap up in hopes that it caught on? I mean, what? Because we know Thackery was in fact turned into a cat because, you know, the movie happens. So how did Mrs. Olin know about the cat spell? How does she know what happened to Thackery Binx if no one else in Salem proper knew back then? Well, I've got an idea, and the answer might surprise you. So, when Hocus Pocus begins, we go through the prologue of Halloween 1693 when the Sanderson sisters kick Emily Binx and turn her big brother Thackery into a cat. Cool, we've got the idea, and that sets up for what happens later. But then, after the witches are hanged, and that wind blows, setting up Winifred's active curse, we hear a narrator finishing up the story. Fade out from a witch's hat, and we meet Mrs. Olin, who is telling the legend of the Sanderson sisters to her class. Now, here's where things get a little sticky with her statement.
Poor Thackery Binx. Neither his father, his mother, nor anyone else ever knew what became of him.
We, the audience, know that everything in the legend is true, as everything set up in the prologue is revealed to be fact later by either the Sanderson sisters or Thackery Binx himself. But here's the problem with fading into Mrs. Olin, telling us all this while claiming no one, neither his father, his mother, nor anyone else in 1693 Salem knew what happened to Thackery Binx. How in the blue blazes does she have that knowledge? We are left to assume that she has all of the details in the prologue down to what happened inside the house because, as the movie shows us, she's the one telling us everything that happened in the prologue. In those first 10 minutes, it's her telling the story. It would make sense for her to know about the Sanderson sisters, as they are the town legends and a big money-making attraction, well, at least until the museum closed down, because, you know, a lot of spooky things happen there. But those intimate details of what happened inside the cottage on that fateful night should have remained a mystery. The villagers didn't really give the Sanderson sisters time to confess their crimes, not like they would have anyway, because as we know, they relish in their petulance.
Cat's got my tongue!
They were hung before the truth could come out, and the only other two witnesses are either dead or a cat! There has to be another party involved with this, and for once, I'm not pointing the finger at you-know-who.
Voldemort?
No, I'm not talking about Trask this time. We already know the importance of his journals being passed down, but those don't really fit the narrative of this specific scenario. Because, again, no one else is supposed to have known what happened to him. No, the third party I'm focusing on this time is someone else who was directly involved with the initial beginning of the prologue. I'm talking about Thackery's best friend, Elijah. Elijah was already up and about when Thackery came out to find Emily, and he'd noticed that the Sanderson sisters were conjuring some sort of spell. He pointed Thackery in the right direction and even followed him as far as the edge of the village where the field meets the forbidden wood. Thackery put him in charge of gathering the elders and waking his family. Elijah knew Thackery was going to confront the fabled witches head-on, and likely explained this to the elders and Binx's parents. We see him present at the execution of the Sanderson sisters as well, where he is the one holding on to Book. He also knows about the curse of resurrection Winifred placed on the town, because he was there. Thackery is his best friend, and he's missing, so let's be real. Elijah probably did his darndest to figure out what happened to him. Now here's where Thackeray himself comes into play. There was a cut montage from Hocus Pocus of Binx watching his family and friends grow older and pass on. This includes Elijah. Just because the montage was cut does not mean it didn't technically still happen. Binx still had to endure those 300 years and watch the ones he loved grow old and pass away. When he was first turned into a cat, we saw that he couldn't talk like he used to because he was just meowing, but when we meet him later, it's clear he got his voice back. Binx would have had to reteach himself how to speak, and I'd say it would have been a lot like maybe a baby learning how to talk. It takes a long time before they can start saying words, and then they have to figure out how to say sentences. He'd have to figure out sounds. He'd have to figure out the words again in his new form because cat anatomy is very different than human anatomy. But once he got it, he was good. Those early days of practicing, however, could have been where we fill in our little plot hole. Max is not the first person to have heard Binx, the cat, speak.
What?
Let me break it down for you. Someone who was in the Sanderson cottage that night would be the only one to know all of those intimate little details and pass that knowledge on to the person who would eventually relay it to Mrs. Olin. Thackery Binx told his story to someone who would listen to him. We saw that his father had kicked him aside when he tried to reach out in cat form. Trask and his descendants would never listen to him, as they'd call him a creation of the devil or other slurs. So the only person left for Thackeray to try communicating with is his best friend, Elijah. He'd have to have a few years to regain his voice, like I said, but he could easily start getting his attention with simple meows and gestures. Thackeray eventually manages to say his best friend's name, which of course scares the daylights out of him, and he believes, to the surprise of no one, it's the work of the devil. It takes a lot of tries on Thackeray's part for him to prove to Elijah that it is him before he's able to even begin telling him what happened. At this point, Elijah's a husband and a father, so Thackeray asks him not to say anything to anyone in the village about their meeting. Why, you may ask? Why keep this secret? Why else? To keep Elijah safe from being hanged for consulting with a devilish familiar. Elijah finds out exactly what happened to Thackeray on Halloween night 1693, and he swears to keep it secret, only passing it down to his family. Thackeray and Elijah would work together to keep people away from the cursed witch's house, so no one ever meets the same fate. Thackeray's story is passed down through Elijah's family for centuries until it reaches his descendant, Mrs. Olin. Yep, that's how she knows. Mrs. Olin is a descendant of Thackeray's best friend. It makes sense that she would have insider information if her family knew about it from back in the day. Allison even says, so the legends are true. Legends plural, implying there is more than one legend going around Salem about the Sanderson sisters and their deeds. So Mrs. Olin telling one more specifically about the Binx family tragedy makes total sense. And thanks to that cut montage, we know that Elijah carried on after 1693, so he would sire a line of descendants that easily could meet up with Mrs. Olin. We never hear his last name. We don't know if she's married, so she could have a maiden name that matches his, or vice versa. So the connection is easy to make with her being his descendant. When we look back at the statement she makes with this part in mind.
Poor Thackery Binx. Neither his father, his mother, nor anyone else ever knew what became of him those 300 years ago.
She could mean that no one knew what became of Thackeray because no one could. Elijah would have been hanged for consulting with spirits of alleged deceased people, and Thackeray would never have let that happen to his best friend. The only way his story could safely be kept alive and eventually told to more people was to pass it down to the next generation until people stopped being so hysterical about things they didn't know. This is the only way to explain that plot hole and have it make sense in terms of the story. Mrs. Olin believes the story with all her heart because her family was tasked with keeping the truth to themselves for so long until the environment shifted and they could tell people what really happened to Thackery Binx. Sure, they knew no one would actually believe them, but they did what they could regardless. So every year on Halloween, Mrs. Olin tells her family's story to the students in hopes of deterring them from ever bringing back the Sanderson sisters. And then Max happened. So there you go. That's my theory on how Mrs. Olin knows the truth about Thackery Binx, even though no one else in Salem did. What do you guys think? Does my theory have merit, or is it just a desperate attempt to overthink a kid's movie? Hey, newsflash, if you think it's the second one, it's literally my job to overthink a kid's movie. That's why YouTube pays me. If you enjoyed this video, regardless, please remember to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't. It's free, it helps me, and what helps me helps you guys get more great content like this. I was actually very excited about this theory, because once I started, I couldn't stop. I was just like, oh, here we go, baby. Oh, this is awesome. I figured out a thing. I was so hype. I was so hyped, and I hope you guys liked it. I'll be back. This week, I'm actually going to be changing our gaming schedule this week, as I've got plans on Saturday. So on Friday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be live with Black Flame Gaming. We'll continue Sarah Sanderson's Pokemon Soul Silver Randomized Nuzlocke and see where she ends up at the end of the episode, because we had a doozy of an encounter last time, and we didn't get to catch it. If you haven't watched the short, I'm sure Editing Me is plugging it now, or it'll show up at the end of the video. I've never left a stream so angry. I was so disappointed. So please go check out that VOD so you can see why I'm so disappointed. If you're a regular on this channel, please remember to drop a like and share your thoughts on this crazy theory down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Casey Zogelman, aka the Ford Sanderson Sister, and I'll see you witches and wizards later.